His civil fraud trial is underway in New York, and the former president is set to stand trial in 4 criminal cases next year. But there are also 2 lawsuits, one in Colorado and one in Minnesota, that are trying to stop Donald Trump's name from appearing on their ballots. Both suits argue the former president is ineligible to run for office because of a clause in the 14th Amendment known as the Insurrection Clause. This is what the Insurrection Clause says. No person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president and vice president or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state who, having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or as an officer of the United States or as a member of any state legislature or as an executive or judicial officer of any state to support the Constitution of the United States, shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid to comfort to the enemies thereof. That's long, but let me just tell you, the lawsuits argue that Donald Trump's actions leading up to and on January 6th, they disqualify him from office for that very definition. Then in Michigan, Donald Trump has already filed a lawsuit himself to block efforts to keep him off the ballot there. Basil Smikle and J.C. Polanco are back with me. Charles Coleman is also here. He's a former Brooklyn prosecutor and an MSNBC legal analyst. Okay, Charles, Donald Trump hasn't been convicted of anything yet. He has been indicted on many things. But I just read the Insurrection Clause, and it doesn't say you have to be convicted of being an insurrectionist, just that you participated. And I have eyes. I think he participated. I don't know.
And I think that's the heart of the issue that we're talking about, Simone. The question is, what is the standard that the Constitution has set forward in terms of establishing whether someone has met that burden as being an insurrectionist or providing aid or comfort to insurrectionists? And because he has not been charged nor convicted, the line becomes far more murky, and that's why we are where we are in court.
Charles, listen, you got 1,100 people that have been indicted. 660 have either pled guilty or been found guilty of going into and having an insurrection in Washington on January 6th. Over 600 years of sentences have been dished out. You don't need a conviction. You don't need that in order for this part of the Constitution to stick. And I think it's very interesting because it's self-executing. For example, you need to be 35 in order to be president.
Sure.
You have to be a naturalized citizen of the United States. You have to be born American. So no matter how much I like Arnold Schwarzenegger, he can never run for president of the United States. We don't need to go through the courts for this. We heard the president say that we have to stop the Constitution and cease it because he didn't like the results. We heard him what he did on January 6th. He summoned the mob, as we've seen on the reports, and he's gone and led this insurrection against our Constitution.
So, but hold on a second, because Basil is a former Democratic Party chair here. I'm going to call on the chair. Basil, okay, so hearing the arguments on the table, if you were a current Dem Party chair, I mean, I think you know a little something about getting people off the ballot in the state.
Yeah.
What would you do?
Yeah, a lot of time spent at the Board of Elections trying to figure out how to get people off the ballot. So listening to both of those arguments, this is the problem, because it's not an easy fix. It takes time. And in that time, what's going to happen? You're going to have all of Donald Trump's supporters engaged, enraged, and exacting some kind of retribution, if you will. Is that something that we Democrats want to be able to engage when we're also trying to pump up the Biden-Harris ticket, and by the way, the rest of the ticket? Having said that, I have this sort of zoom out concern, which is that we're debating whether or not Donald Trump should be president given what he did. I'm also concerned about the millions of black men in this country where we are still debating whether or not they should be able to vote in this country. It seems like there's a clearer line for what Donald Trump did, but not as clear a line in the public debates about restoring the rights of these African-American men. So my point is that the law works differently, and we interpret the law and embrace the law differently for different populations. And I think people notice that, they see that. And if you're an African-American saying, look at what Donald Trump has done, and he gets to run for president, I did my time, I can't vote. That is a problem that we really should be focused on.
I would agree. The civil rights attorney in me is never going to not be in favor of talking about restoring the rights of people who have been impacted by the system to have access to the vote. I think that part of the problem when you're having this conversation, I've said this a lot, is that Democrats, quite frankly, have a messenger problem and a messaging problem. And when I talk about that, what I mean is when you're framing the conversation about Donald Trump, democracy, the future of democracy, part of this and everything that you've talked about has to be ingrained and embedded into your message. You can't simply make the message about whether Donald Trump is fit to hold office or run for president. You have to talk about democracy in terms of who has access. And we have done a good job in terms of voting disenfranchisement and rights and redistricting, but we have not done a good job of having that conversation as it relates to returning citizens.
I had a pollster, I talked to a pollster recently, and he has been going around the country specifically talking about this democracy issue in focus groups, which I like focus groups better than the polls, because the focus group people tell you what they really think. And in the focus group conversation, he said that democracy does not resonate well with certain communities and constituencies who feel as though that the democracy has never worked for them in the first place.
That's exactly
and so in talking about democracy being on the ballot, if you will, whether it's Tuesday, this upcoming Tuesday, or next year, they have to recognize that the democracy is currently broken. JC.
Well, yeah, democracy is broken, but you have someone who is running for president who has already demonstrated that he has very little care for the Constitution or our democratic principles. We saw it ourselves. We heard it. You don't need to have a trial on this. Now, the question that we have is, are we afraid? And I'm an independent. You're the Democrats here. Are we afraid?
You're a Democrat? You know what? Don't answer that question.
Are we afraid of a decision that may upset his base so much that we would look the other way and not enforce the Constitution?
Well, you know who's not afraid? Fonnie Willis.
That's insane.
Right.
That's
Well,
that's not fair.
and you're talking about the integrity of the institution. And in the same way, I am talking about the same thing from a legal precedent. Regardless of whatever I saw or whatever I believe Donald Trump's responsibility was with respect to January 6th, there still needs to be some articulation by the court to say, here's where you cross the line and where it doesn't matter.
I would say,
call on Basil Schmeichel.
Thank you. But I would say, I also say, and this is the concern, because it has to go through the courts. How long is that going to take? And my issue is the more time you spend talking about why we shouldn't vote for Donald Trump, the less time we have to talk about why we should be voting Biden-Harris. And that to me is and it's going back to this earlier point about the democracy. And if you think about, let me go back and center African-American men like myself, right? Because in this moment in time, if I'm thinking about democracy as a whole, how often in my life do I feel that democracy actually works for me?
Right.
So I want more time, as much time as possible, for the administration that wants my vote to tell me why I should care. And that's
well, Basil Schmeichel gets the last word on this. I will note Andy wrote a very nice, got great questions. We asked none of them today, but this was an excellent conversation. It's also my last panel with 3 men because y'all don't follow directions sometimes. But I appreciate you all for coming in. Charles Coleman, Basil Schmeichel, and JC Polanco. Appreciate y'all.